afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our Cambridge Health and Human Development Getting Your Students Exam Ready webinar. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. My name is Emma Kappler and I'm the Victorian Education Sales Manager. I look after the inner city, Bayside and Mornington Peninsula schools in Melbourne. Before I make a start with the introductions, I want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and will be distributed by email to all those after the event. You can ask questions in the Q&A box that you'll see below on your screen. We'll constantly be monitoring this during the webinar. There will also be time for questions at the end of the presentations. I'm now going to introduce you to our friendly Victorian sales team. We have Paula Kelly. Paula looks after the western suburbs and also the regional areas in the west. We have Carolyn Chilora, who looks after the northern suburbs and the regional areas in the northern parts of Victoria. And then we have Jenny Nelson, who looks after the southeastern suburbs and the regional areas in the south. I'm sure many of you have been in contact with our team over the years. And now to our wonderful author team of presenters who you're going to see shortly. We have Sonia Goodacre and Chrissy Collins. Both have been writing for our Health and Human Development series for many years now. Plus our newest members to the team, we have Alison Howard, Janine, Konoroth, Emily, Mathews and Kate Sims. They are all highly regarded and passionate teachers of health and human development with experience in VCE exam assessment, curriculum development and review, the delivery of professional development for teachers, and exam preparation lectures for students. We've expanded the team to include a wide range of areas of expertise and to ensure we're truly covering the study design. So I'm just going to show you or run through the outline of our webinar. Just waiting for that page to come up. Alison Howard is actually going to start things off. And then we're going to follow with Chrissy and Janine, I believe. And then followed by Emily and Kate. Sonia's then going to have a run through of the features of the textbook. Here we go. And then I'm going to come back on and I'll run through the features. Some of the features I'll show you of the interactive textbook. And then we'll finish with any questions that you might have after the session. So thank you. I'm now going to hand you over to Alison.
Thanks, Emma. Today I'm going to talk through the key strengths from the 2019 VCAA exam and some key areas where students have struggled. I'm then going to discuss some of the ways that we as teachers can best prepare our students for the end of year exam. So generally, students do well on questions that relate to recall of knowledge and description of content, including definitions and descriptions of terms and identification of content. The main areas where students do well are the low order thinking questions and recall of knowledge, with most students showing at least some level of understanding to achieve marks for their answers. Definitions and identification of content, so identifying sociocultural or physical environmental factors, for example, or describing dimensions of health and wellbeing are examples of that sort of question that students generally do quite well. Students generally struggle a lot more when they need to delve deeper into ideas, and I think we probably find that in our own students when we're reading through their tasks. So whenever they need to apply their knowledge and show greater understanding of a topic, if students are asked to do multiple things within the one question, they'll often miss part of what they need to do. Or if there is information and data provided, students will often struggle or not attempt to link their answers. So questions relating to application of knowledge, detailed explanation of content, or evaluation or analysis of information and data that was provided. So if students don't really understand what the command words within the question actually mean, for example, analyse, discuss, describe, evaluate, if they don't know what those terms require them to do, then they struggle to do what they need to do to get full marks. So it's especially true of the higher order thinking questions such as evaluating, justifying and analysing. For example, if students don't understand that to evaluate something, they need to perhaps talk about the strengths and the weaknesses and put in their own opinion. So I believe that this will be successful or something like that. Then they won't be awarded full marks for their answers. Students struggle to accurately address what the question is asking. So it's especially true where students are expected to address a variety of things within the one question. So they might be reading the question but not addressing all of the aspects of what's being asked. A key issue is that students don't use their key terms enough to show understanding. So talking about improving health and wellbeing or impacting health status or burden of disease or human development isn't going to get students the marks. They need to be able to show that they understand what those terms mean by using the key terms related to those words. Sometimes students struggle to interpret what topic content the question is related to. I always say to my students that whatever question is on the exam, they've learnt what the question's asking them. It just might not be that obvious. And they might have to stop and think about what the question's actually asking them. Students need to be reminded to read questions carefully, consider the mark allocation. So obviously if it's a 4-mark question, they might need to make 4 points or make 2 points and explain it really carefully. So really think about how many marks the question's worth. They need to take time to think about and plan their responses so that they're clear and address all parts of the question being asked. And obviously, if they've got time to go back and read over their responses, especially to the more in-depth questions that they've answered. So anytime there is information or data provided, students need to refer to it correctly and explicitly in their responses. I think sometimes students think that just putting a number down is all they need to do, but if the number is incorrect or if the unit they've used is incorrect, they're not going to get the marks for that. So I think we'll probably find that students really struggle to grasp the concept of data, and it doesn't matter how much practice they get, they still, or many still seem to struggle. And we also know that the graphs in the exam aren't always nice, simple line or bar graphs. So I always try in my teaching to use a variety of different sources of information and data so that when students get to the exam, they're used to seeing different sorts of things and they're less likely to be thrown by whatever they're faced with. Extended response questions, which are high-level thinking questions where students are faced with multiple sources of data and information and they need to synthesise it with their own understanding of a topic and formulate a response, is where the vast majority of students really struggle. The question itself often covers a number of things that students need to address in their response. And the majority of students struggle to achieve more than about 3 or 4 out of 10 for those questions. Students need to ensure that they read the question really carefully and try to pick up on the key wording, which is something that many students struggled with in the 2019 exam. Students were asked to discuss key features of SDG 3 as part of the response to that question, and many students didn't discuss more than one key feature of SDG 3. So if they didn't do that and the rest of their answer might have been a beautiful response, they actually probably couldn't get more than about 4 out of 10 for that question. So it came up in the wording of that question. So what can we do to try to assist our students to achieve more highly on the exam? Really using reading time effectively, spending revision time on the interpretation of command words and really explaining to students what those command words mean and what they need to do to achieve marks for those questions. Spending time breaking down questions and planning and formulating responses, rather than spending all of the revision time practicing the answering of the questions, allowing students to spend time just interpreting what the question's asking and working out a plan of how to go about answering it, and discussing aspects of what the question is asking them to do. Practice reading and interpreting data from a range of different sources and practicing answering questions using data so that students feel more comfortable with it. And those are often lower order questions that students should be able to achieve highly on. So if they're feeling more confident with those questions, they should be able to achieve the marks. Practicing integrating and applying knowledge across Unit 3 during revision. I think students become really fixed with the knowledge that they gained in Unit 3 Outcome 1, and they don't really bring a lot of their knowledge into other parts of the course. So there are opportunities to sort of integrate knowledge. So for example, encouraging students to use the knowledge that they gained in Unit 3 Outcome 1 related to the contribution of smoking, alcohol, dietary risks to health status in Australia, in conjunction with the impact of global distribution and marketing of tobacco, alcohol and processed foods from Unit 4 Outcome 1. So the knowledge for those two parts of the course tie in really closely, and students just need to be reminded that they actually already know a lot of stuff that they can use to answer questions. Practicing extended response questions and providing sample rubrics so that students can clearly see how these sorts of questions are marked is, I think, really key. If students understand where the marks are coming from, they're more likely to know what they need to do in order to get a high result for that question. And constantly practicing concepts and terms so that it becomes automatic for students to be able to use correct terminology to answer questions linked to, say, health status, health and wellbeing, burden of disease and human development, which is where a lot of the students fall down and miss marks throughout the exam. I'm now going to hand over to Janine and Chrissy to discuss Unit 3 revision, particularly in relation to extended response questions.
Hi everyone, thanks Alison. I'm Janine, and Chrissy and I are going to be sharing with you an extended response question from Unit 3. I'll be unpacking the question just as I would in my classroom, and Chrissy is then going to discuss that holistic response and the marking criteria and the rubrics as Alison just spoke about. This particular extended response question is from Chapter 4 of our text and relates to the first key knowledge of Unit 3 Area Study 2. So when looking at a question like this in my classroom, I would actually ask students to have a look at the question and identify what key knowledge the question applies to, so that students can start to think about what do they know, what have they learned, what information should be in the answer. And as Alison said, this is important for integrating their knowledge because, as we know, some questions can relate to information or key knowledge within units or between Units 3 and 4. So in terms of this particular graph, as Alison mentioned, analysis of data is a weakness of many students. And this graph was specifically selected as it is challenging to interpret. And we do know that from past VCAR exams, the graphs are not always easy to interpret or to read. So we thought it was important to include a range of data so that we can better prepare our students for their examination at the end of the year. So looking at this graph specifically, we can see on the left-hand side the number of deaths. We can see, and then on the right-hand side, its rate. Now the data indicates that the number of deaths has increased slightly, and I would circle as I have on the screen here and put my arrows in. I would do that in my classroom. So source 1 shows that the number of deaths from bowel cancer has increased from approximately 3,500 in 1982 to approximately 4,000 in 2018. Source 1 also shows that the death rate per 100,000 has decreased over time. And that is since 1982, bowel cancer rates have declined from approximately 30 cases per 100,000 to approximately 15 cases per 100,000 population. And the data also shows, we can see that there's an estimated and actual. So the data also shows that the estimated death rate will continue to decrease. So it's important that students use all the information from the graph, including that data measurement of per 100,000. Also, source 2, we can see here, this is information that's taken directly from the bowel screening program. And that information and the wording that's presented here can be seen or can be used directly in students' answers. So looking at the question, the question here is referring to sources 1 and 2, explain how the relationship between the biomedical approach, the social model of health, has addressed the mortality rates of bowel cancer in Australia, and it's worth 8 marks. So here you can see we've underlined a few of those key command words, and I would actually circle and underline those and get the girls, or in my case, to highlight these key words so we can start to formulate what's required within the answer. So first of all, it says referring to source 1 and 2, we know that students are required to make reference to each source of data, so for each of the sources. So we would expect data, so I'd expect numbers in their answers, and wording directly from source 2. In terms of explain, we know students are expected to provide a detailed understanding using examples. If students use examples, they'll be able to do this effectively. In terms of the word relationships, then we're looking at how does the biomedical approach and the social model of health work together? How do they complement each other to address or reduce the mortality rates of bowel cancer? Importantly here, when we are looking at this relationship between the biomedical approach and the social model of health and how they've addressed mortality rates, it's important that students use the source material to provide specific examples of how each of the models of health can reduce bowel cancer. So instead of students just stating, the screening program as an example of the biomedical approach, then we'd expect students to say something along the lines of, the National Bowel Screening Program through pathology tests to detect bowel cancer is an example of the biomedical approach. So it's important that the examples link back to bowel cancer. If I was doing this in my class, the next question I'd get from my students is, do I need to define the biomedical approach or the social model and the social model of health? And I would actually say to the students, look, you don't necessarily have to, but what I encourage students to do is to use the wording from the definition in their answer. And that then shows their understanding of each model of health. So, the wording, using wording like detection and treatment would help show their understanding of the biomedical approach. And I guess this goes back to what Alison just said, is using key words in answers is really important. So that's what I would do in my class. And now I'm going to hand over to Chrissy to talk about the holistic marking.
Great, thanks Janine. And look, thanks everyone for joining us. We all hope that you are safe and well in these ever-changing and dynamic times, and it is so great that you've taken time out to be with us tonight, and I hope that particularly those in Mitchell and Melbourne Shires are doing okay. Look, let's talk about assessing a question like this. So I think it's really important that we understand how these higher mark questions are actually assessed, such as our extended response question, and also too, sometimes I think in exams our 4, 5 and sort of 6, 7, 8 mark questions are also being assessed using this approach. So unlike in our past and previous study designs where we've awarded marks for key information and it's kind of been the tick, 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 we all remember the days of the interrelationships question and it was 2 marks, 2 marks, 2 marks. Really now what we're seeing is these questions being holistically marked. And so you can see we have provided a marking descriptor or a rubric for you, and we've done this for every extended response question that's in every chapter. What's really important here, and Alison mentioned this too, but we can't just emphasise this enough to our students, is how well they have synthesised this information and then applied it to answering the question. And that's about being able to step back and look at what they've read and then start to draw some conclusions. Look for where things are connected. That I often talk to them about the GAT. They synthesize information in the GAT. That's what we need them to do here. All right, applying what they've read to the question, but bringing it all together first. So after reading the question, I get them to step back and think about the following things. How well have you understood the stimulus material? Because this is what you're going to be assessed on when your question is being marked. How well have you understood the stimulus material? What have you understood? How have you connected it, as in finding links between the sources and within the sources, and that synthesis. how well the stimulus material has been used to support the analysis in the response, and how well your answer, your response has been structured. So again, you know, we don't want students to rush and go dot point, dot point, dot point. Dot points can be okay in many cases, and if you're rushing, then that's better than nothing. But actually, how they structure this question clearly aligns with how they're being marked. So we want to see cohesion, coherence, and what are the words from the Chief Assessor's report last year? Talked about, you know, that real connection. So that's what's really important here. Oh, yeah, clarity and coherence. So just remind your students that those are the words that we're looking for when their questions are being marked. Personally, I always approach this like I've been taught doing gap marking, read the answer and then think first, is it a high, is it a medium, or is it a low? Where does it sit? That kind of helps me then interrogate the descriptor and work out which descriptor really fits in with the response that I've read best. So I'm able to apply the descriptor. Remember that the top marks or the upper range really reflects the best that we're seeing. 4 marks in particular for this question is the middle range. So 10-mark question, it's a 5. You know, that's where the hump should be in our distribution, and that's the average. And then of course we'll see lower end responses as well, because a question like this should discriminate your students. It should spread them out. We shouldn't see everyone getting an 8. We shouldn't see everyone getting a 2 or a 4. We should see, you know, students across every marking band there. Typically, if students do not refer to all of the sources provided to them or fail to connect them, actually use them and connect them, so they might actually just write source 1 and write exactly what's written, transcribe it. That's not using it, that's transcribing what they've been given. So that can't be awarded anything. So remember, if typically if students do not refer to the sources, use them, or fail to connect to them, they can't really get a mark that's higher than the average. So here, that would be a 3 or a 4. And you can see that reflected there in the marking descriptor. They just haven't given a robust response. Plus, they haven't brought the information into their answer. I think it's also really important here to remind students not just to tick off. So not to go, I've written source 1, I put source 1 in brackets, tick, I've done it. You know, or 3 sources, even if it's what we see, you know, typically in the exam. They've got to talk to the information. They've got to talk to the stimulus. They've got to tell us what it's providing. They've got to make those connections exactly like Janine said she would say, you know, when unpacking this question in her class. And remind your students, this is an application question. This isn't recall. This isn't, what can I tell you that I've memorized? This is, I need to use what I've learnt this year and apply it to the context of this question. And that's really important. So I'm reminding them to use what you've been given rather than tell me what you remember. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see we've given you, provided a sample high-level response. Please remember, and I remind my students all the time, I've got a great student who's chemistry is his thing, and he goes, I need the formula for this question. There really is no formula, all right? Again, I come back to, it's not like what we used to teach with interrelationships. They have to be able to use their skill. This is a high-level application question. And you can see from the marking descriptor, if you go back and have a look at the marking descriptor, compare it to what we've got here in this sample answer, you can see that this is a high-level response. So just wrapping up, what do I do with assessment? I've told you how I tackle it, high, medium, low. The first thing I do before we even start a question like this is I also show my students how it's marked. I take them through holistic marking. I remind them that we see this in English, in the GAT, in psychology, in legal. It's new to our study. We have it in food studies. We've been marking extended questions across a lot of studies for a long time. So get them to find those links to where they've done it in other subjects as well. And I remind them what we are looking for in a response, and that a response will differ. This is one example of high level. It's not what everyone will come up with. They'll use it in different ways, and that doesn't make it right or wrong. That's an application question. I want them to see the whole concept around a question. So again, unpack that whole question and then be in the best position to tackle these extended response questions and therefore achieving their best. So we've unpacked a Unit 3 question from Go to Woe, extended response. I'm going to now hand over to Kate and Emily, and they're going to take you through a little something from Unit 4. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chrissy. So Kate and I are going to go through one of our questions that we've featured in the book and just break down, firstly, I'm going to break down the question and the way that I might talk to my students about what they should do when they see a question like this. And then Kate will go through a bit of a sample answer and how this would actually be marked. So firstly, part A of this exam prep question, you can see it's one of those lower order identify questions, but it does point to the fact that the students do really need to know SDG 3 really well, including those key features, and that is outlined in the study design. So reminding students to refer back to the fact that they need to know SDG 3 key features is really important, and then working with your students for ways that they can remember the different key features, whether that's for them, you know, having a poster or, you know, on their wall, or, you know, constantly saying them in class as well from your end, just to clarify that information with them. In this particular case, it is, you can see an infographic that they're identifying the key feature from, but, you know, you've got to prepare them for identifying a key feature from either an infographic or potentially some data, or even a statement about what, you know, things that are happening, and they need to be able to identify that key feature. For part B, this is where we're looking at that link to the other SDGs. So we're looking here at actions towards SDG 4, quality education. And what we've seen in the exam, in particular since the change of study design, you know, we've seen that the SDGs are featured, with SDG featuring really heavily. And in our study design as well, it doesn't necessarily point out that specifically we need to know key features of the other SDGs, but they are mentioned in terms of, you know, understanding that relationship. And it's important that students understand that you need to know the SDG pretty well. You need to show that you've studied the SDG. So in the example of quality education, it'd be asking students, well, what actually is quality education? What does that look like? The statement quality education on its own, it's not enough to show deep understanding of that SDG. So, you know, what I work with my students with is actually saying to them, well, what does quality education look like? And then getting them to think about, well, in Australia, what's quality education, and how is that different when we look at the globe? Part of what they can do is also looking at some of those key targets for those SDGs will help them to show a level of understanding of those other SDGs. So, you know, an activity, for example, that I do with my class is getting them to go on the SDGs website and actually read the targets for each of those other goals. And that will give them that understanding of what, for this example, quality education actually looks like. But also in the exam, you know, if it's no poverty, poverty is such a broad term. If they can't discuss specific aspects of what no poverty wants to achieve, then they're not going to be showing that understanding. And it will also make it more difficult to talk about the relationship between that SDG and SDG 3. In this particular example, the other thing to be pointing out to students, this is where it's important that they read the question really carefully. So it's talking about how could the actions for SDG 4 assist in achieving the feature identified in the first part of the question. So if they then start talking about other key features, they're not really answering the question correctly, and they probably wouldn't be awarded any marks. Similarly, it's important that they use reading time. So in this example, they were given a prompt to identify a key feature, but if they were given the choice, it's about picking something that they then know they could write about in part B of the question. But very much so working with them using some key targets for the other SDGs will show that level of understanding. But again, I talk to my students about, obviously, it's not about memorizing those targets for the other SDGs. It is about understanding them. And I think that's what we talk, you know, we hear a lot about, that this study design is moving away from memorizing. But talking to them about what does quality education actually look like, and getting some discussions around that would help to show that understanding. And then, but using some of that language that they see in the targets. So often we see in the targets, it's about all people everywhere. And we know that that's so that the SDGs are inclusive of, you know, improving global health. If students can use that language, it will show that they have a deeper understanding or a better understanding of the other SDGs. So although SDG 3 is the SDG in the study design, that's really the focus, understanding and having a deep knowledge of the others is also really important. And you'll see that in the answer that Kate will go through with you now. We've highlighted the areas where we've shown that we actually know what quality education is. It's not a broad term. So I'll pass over to Kate now, and she will go through with you a sample answer that will demonstrate how students can show a deep understanding of other SDGs.
Thanks for that, Emily. I'm just going to go through our suggested answers and a marking scheme. So part A says identify one feature of a sustainable development goal, good health and wellbeing, that's relevant to addressing the health issues shown in the infographic above. So the one we've chosen is to reduce premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention, treatment, and promote mental health and wellbeing. So this answer doesn't have to be word for word, but it needs to be fairly similar in order to be awarded the 1 mark. Therefore, but some other possible wording that you could use is reduce premature mortality from non-communicable diseases, or prevention and treatment of non-communicable diseases. So that's how we could word it, and it's still not word for word, but you could still get 1 mark. Some other possible suggested answers. So the other key features that they could look at is strengthen the implementation of the WHO framework on tobacco controls. They need to then make that link between tobacco, smoking, and cardiovascular disease. Or they could also use achieve universal health coverage, so access to quality essential healthcare services, and then again link the ability to access healthcare and medications to manage cardiovascular disease. So in part B, the second part, the answer here must link quality education back to the achievement of the key feature in part A. So that is where we need to ensure that we've got chosen, the answer we've chosen for part A is going to help us make part B easier for us to answer. So here we link quality education back. And so I said, Emily had said that remembering key features of quality education can help make your answer or strengthen your answer. So a high quality answer is one that identifies aspects of quality education, then explains how that education is used to enhance aspects of good health and wellbeing, SDG 3, and then finally links back to reducing premature mortality from non-communicable diseases. It's so important that we always get students to look at the number of marks for a question to help identify the detail required. So I would get them to break this question into 2 parts. It may be 2 paragraphs that are separated by dot points, and that way they tend to be more succinct because they're breaking it down. While we don't want students wasting their time repeating the question at the start of their answer, we need to ensure that they look back at the question and ensure it links back to what the question is asking us, and ideally here that it links back to reducing rates of premature mortality from non-communicable diseases. So here we've got our suggested answer that we've come up with. So we've talked about 2 marks for 2 aspects of quality education, and then 2 marks the achievement of quality education is linked back to the SDG 3 key feature. So we've talked about all girls and boys have equal access to education, which enhances literacy and numeracy. So that's identifying that we understand what quality education looks like. We've then said the ability to read and interpret food labels can help ensure individuals can make informed choices about food products that may have lower fat, sugar when compared to similar products. And then we've linked that back to making informed choices could help reduce rates of obesity and then prevent premature mortality from non-communicable diseases such as type 2 diabetes. So we're showing our knowledge that we understand what a non-communicable disease is as well, and that's important. The second part is access to vocational and tertiary training. So that's our aspect of quality education. So again, we're demonstrating knowledge of what quality education looks like. So with that comes employment. Individuals have the ability to earn an income, which allows them to access healthcare. And then we talk about how timely access to healthcare ensure non-communicable conditions such as hypertension, high blood cholesterol, which are risk factors for cardiovascular disease, are detected, treated early, and then linking it back to reducing rates of premature mortality from cardiovascular disease. So we're sort of broken down here what we're looking for and how to go at tackling this sort of question and linking the education to the good health and wellbeing key SDG 3 key features. Hopefully that sort of explains sort of how we would have tackled this question and what we're sort of looking for in an answer. And I'm now going to hand over to Sonia.
Okay, welcome. Hello, everybody. Just want to say I'm feeling pretty privileged to work with this amazing group of people who have managed to co-present remotely for our first presentation together. I think they've done an amazing job. It's my privilege now to be able to talk to you about the key features of our brand new textbook. And many of you would know that I've been involved with this publication for a long time. And I'm really super proud to say that I think this is absolutely our best one yet. And I think some of the reasons are when you've got collaboration between a range of different authors contributing, you get lots of ideas, and we just get to polish up some of those ideas that we had early on and have managed to perfect them in this new edition. So I'll quickly run through with you what some of the features are and how you'd be able to use them with your students to hopefully improve their results. So at the start of every single chapter, we've now got sections called What You Need to Know and What You Need to Be Able to Do. These have been taken quite literally from the key knowledge and key skills, but I think that it's in language that students will understand. So these are the things I need to know, and then this is how I need to be able to use them. So these are appearing at the beginning of every single chapter and will help students with getting those correct skill words, which Alison spoke about in the very beginning, that it's really important students understand the difference between explaining and describing and those kind of things. So hopefully this will help give kids some context of what they'll be studying in each chapter. We've got discuss questions again, which we've had since I think the very first edition of the book, but what we've done this time is really evaluated each and every single one of them and decided which ones deserved a place and which ones didn't, and we've added some new questions along the way. These kinds of questions are designed to do exactly what they claim, and that's get your kids to discuss a whole range of concepts. They're the kind of questions that are best tackled sharing with other people. So rather than students having to sit on their own and write a written response, they're designed to stimulate discussion with kids. They're a great way to use as either pre-testing to see what kids know about a particular topic before you start, or as a bit of a post-test at the end of a lesson, just to say, you know, how much deep understanding have the students developed about this particular concept. In previous editions of the book, we've had extension questions, and we had these at the end of the chapter. So we'd have chapter summary questions, the exam prep questions, and then hidden in amongst that, we had extension questions. Now, these were designed to either be extension in terms of time, so the things that would take students longer to complete, like a research task, or extension in terms of being higher order kind of questions. And we decided that with adding some other new features in the book, such as the extended response questions, that was all getting a bit too confusing at the end of a chapter. And we thought it would be nice to put some of those extension questions throughout the textbook. These questions are now specifically designed to be higher order thinking questions, and any of the things that were once extension questions because they required more time, they've been added as activities. So we haven't gotten rid of some of those great research tasks, we've just put them in as activities. So you can see here I put a range of questions in from throughout the textbook, but they're certainly getting kids to think of the content that they've just studied and apply that to a new situation. These questions can be done in group work, but they're actually designed for students to be able to work through on their own to see how many students have got that deep understanding of some of the concepts that you would have covered in class. Probably one of the most exciting features I think we've got of the new edition is the improved summary tools. So we sought feedback from our schools that are using our textbook, and some of the feedback was that some better graphics or visuals, and we absolutely took that on board. And you can see here what we've done in these little colourful mind map kind of diagrams is, rather than just having words like you know, single word text boxes like we might do for the dimensions of health and wellbeing, we've actually got model answers based in these little diagrams. So you can see down the bottom of the screen, improved health outcomes linked to shelter. We've actually gone through and listed what some of those health outcomes might be, and we've linked them specifically to health and wellbeing or health status, so students can get an understanding of, you know, how would they answer a question about how shelter might improve health outcomes. And this is kind of forming the basis, I guess, of a plan of an answer that they might be able to write. These will be particularly helpful in helping your students when they're planning some of those extended response questions. You know, Alison and Chrissy both spoke about the importance of cohesion and planning out those answers. And so having these diagrams in the book helps show students what we're meaning by planning those out. This is kind of the mind mapping or brainstorming students would be able to do when they tackle some of those questions. We've also got some of this information in tables, so a summary at the end of a chapter, maybe to summarise the content. And I know there's lots of examples to case studies like modelling answers that students could use as well that are happening in these visuals. So hopefully something for those visual kids in your classes. This is just another example of a perhaps more comprehensive visual that we've got when we're talking about the impact of a range of factors in Unit 4. And this is showing the impact of a lack of access to safe water on both health and wellbeing and on health status. As I mentioned just briefly before, we've got lots of model answers throughout. So this particular table is in response to the Live Lighter program. That program is summarised within Chapter 4. And then when showing students how to use the Ottawa Charter to evaluate that program or to demonstrate how that program reflects the Ottawa Charter, we've provided a model answer within a table. And then a subsequent activity will have another program and ask the students to follow this same model to complete it themselves. So we're following those really good teaching and learning principles about modelling a response before expecting students to try and complete those responses on their own. We've used updated data throughout, so you can see that this is from a 2019 report. One of the, I guess, benefits of doing a mid-syllabus update is we get to update that data, which we all know as soon as books are published, that health data seems to turn over very quickly. So the importance of using up-to-date data has been a real focus of this new edition. We've updated all of the activities again, done a little checklist about the ones we'd like to keep and the ones that we'd like to replace with some new activities. These are a whole range between case studies, data analysis, and some research activities, so a broad range of activities to meet the needs of a broad range of students. I guess we're all practicing teachers, so we would all approach different chapters differently, and some of us use, you know, more activities in particular chapters than others. And so our strategy, I guess, was to provide a big range of activities so that you as the teacher can determine which ones that you'll do for your class to best suit the needs of your individual students. One of the other great features is that in the interactive teacher edition that we've got suggested answers to all of the activities, which I know in the busyness of a classroom will be a real help to so many of you. The key questions at the end of the chapter, they're still there. They provide a good opportunity for students to check their understanding. So these questions, you know, in the past we've made a really big list of questions. This time around we've tried not to duplicate what's happening within the chapter in activities with the questions. So these would be a good kind of general homework task that students, you know, would all be able to attempt for that quick recall and check that they understand the main content covered. And then at the end of every chapter, we've got the chapter summaries. One of the biggest changes, though, is the chapter summary is now based around the what you need to know section that's at the start of the chapter. So we've broken each of these chapter summaries down, and it's a real basic summary that would prove as a bit of a checklist. So if you went through that list of what you need to know at the beginning, here is the main gist of what you need to know. So when some definitions are important, they'd be included. In this particular chapter, it's talking about Medicare or the healthcare system, and it talks about those key points about Medicare. So hopefully that will help students in their preparation for SACs and exams and preparing their own summary notes. And it will be a quick checklist for students to check that they know what they need to know. Our exam preparation questions have been there since our very first edition, but they've obviously been updated for this new study design. Most of these questions have got multiple parts. As we've gone through today, they've all got sample answers. So there's model answers that everybody's gone through today. They'll be provided in the interactive teacher edition, so you'll have access to all of those. They often give us the opportunity to do exactly what Alison was mentioning earlier, getting kids to integrate curriculum from earlier chapters. So sometimes it might be an end of Unit 3 question, and we'll be able to integrate some of the content from Outcome 1, which is exactly what this question has got students to do. It often has an opportunity for data analysis, whether that be graphs or whether it be case studies. There's some information usually for the students to analyse, which is great practice for them. And it provides a really great opportunity for you to check student understanding. One of the other cheeky ways that I've been using these exam prep questions is using them for the writing of my SACs. So sometimes I'll use some of that data or some of the ideas for questions and just tweak them around, maybe pick a different factor that we look at in the answer, but using the same kind of ideas. So that might be helpful for you as you develop your own assessment tasks as well. And then lastly, it's the extended response question. So these are all usually worth 6 to 10 marks. The marking rubrics and suggested answers will be provided for you. We've already gone through one of those today with Chrissy, one of the responses, but there's one for every single chapter. And also in the interactive textbook, we've provided a second either exam question or extended response question. So hopefully you guys will be so well resourced, you'll be deciding what to leave out of your lesson planning rather than scratching around for resources to support you in the classroom. The interactive textbook, I've spoken about that a little bit, and Emma's going to show you some features in just a second. But I think it's really important because I think this has been one of the underutilised parts of our books in the past. So I really want to encourage you, if you are book listing the Cambridge book, to make sure you log on correctly and get access to that interactive material, because we've got answers to summary questions, the activities, exam prep questions, and those all important extended response questions. There's also extra activities that aren't in the book, which is helpful. And there's also some examination preparation videos to help the kids with content and breaking things down, sort of running lessons for you that are pre-prepared through the interactive textbook. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Emma and we're going to try and run live through some of those interactive materials.
Thanks, Sonia. Hopefully you can see what I'm looking at now. So I'm actually on our Cambridge Go website, and this is where we have a preview of the interactive textbook. So I'm going to show you through that. There's a couple of features that I wanted to point out to you. One of them is our interactive quizzes. So this gives students the instant feedback on where they are at with each topic. So I'm just going to start that for you. And for the purpose of my demonstration, I am going to answer every question. Can you see that? Hopefully you can see those questions. Sorry.
We can see them, Emma.
Oh, good.
I was going to say you're not getting them all right, though.
I know, it is definitely on purpose. There we go. So once you've completed, or your students have completed those questions, they can submit it and they'll get their results here. So you can see, hopefully that's not my 8 attempts, but I'm pretty sure I've got 40% every time. So that's just one of the features of the interactive textbook. And another one, and now I think Sonia perhaps spoke about the exam preparation videos that we have. So we have these videos in every chapter. It just guides students on how to approach and respond to exam style questions. Now this particular video does run for a little over 3 minutes. So I'm going to start it for you now, and I will play the entire video, and once it's finished, then I'll come back to you.
The following set of questions is about the data in this graph. Let's look at question 1. Question 1, part A. Outline a trend using the data provided. This question is worth 1 mark. Remember that trend means pattern. In this case, we are looking at the pattern over time. Carefully read the data provided. Look at the title of the graph and read each axis. Now, look at the whole picture. Find the trend. Make sure you include the information from the data in your response. Making sure you include the information from the data in your response, the answer could be:
life expectancy has improved steadily over time, from approximately 46 for males and 48 for females in 1890 to approximately 80 years for males and 84 years for females in 2016.
Good, that would be worth 1 mark. Remember to use the data in your response to be awarded the mark. On to Part B. Part B. The concept of what it means to be healthy is not defined by the number of years a person lives. Explain the dynamic nature of health and well-being. This question is worth 2 marks. In your answer, you should demonstrate your understanding of the term dynamic, meaning constantly changing, and relate this to health and well-being. When you are explaining, you need to provide detail in your response. Use an example. A potential response could be:
An individual's state of health and well-being is an ever-changing entity that is affected by dynamic interactions with the environment. People can experience good health and well-being at one time, and then a change of circumstances or an event can impact this. Illness, such as a cold or chickenpox, being injured or experiencing stress changes your state of health and well-being.
Next, we have Part C. Part C. Identify one of the prerequisites for health as determined by WHO and describe how it could improve social health and well-being. This question is worth 3 marks. You must correctly name a WHO prerequisite for health. The question specifically asks for its relationship to social health and well-being, so make this explicit link. Include an example to support your response. Selecting shelter as the WHO prerequisite for health, a sample response could be:
Shelter is a WHO prerequisite for health. Having adequate shelter provides people with safety, security, and privacy. Shelter provides a place for people to gather as a community and socialise and develop relationships, which promote social health and well-being.
And that's it. I hope that demonstration helps.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. I did want to just let you know about the availability of our textbooks. So we have units 3 and 4 is actually going to be arriving in stock. The bulk stock of that will arrive on Friday, I believe. Units 1 and 2 is a little bit later. That's due on October the 15th, but we are getting loads of page proof, full page proofs, complete page proofs of this book in stock in 1 or 2 weeks' time. So we'll definitely ensure that you have those for your book list consideration. All you need to do is let your rep know, and they'll definitely get them sent out to you as soon as possible. And they'll also be put up online to view online as well. Now, I haven't discussed, I don't have a slide for pricing, but if you were wondering, pricing is on our website. But I can tell you that for a print and digital book, it's $84.95, and digital only is $65.95. And then we have an awesome interactive teacher edition, which Sonia spoke about. Now that's $249.95, but we do provide complimentary copies of student textbooks and the interactive teacher edition for every teacher. So if you book list, do let us know so we can get those organised for your planning. Thank you again to everyone that has attended, and thank you to our excellent author team and presenters tonight. At the end of the webinar, you will be asked to fill out a feedback form. So this feedback form is where you can select the book that you would like for your free copy for attending our webinar. Also, I think there's this, oh, there it is here, the slide there, the website address that you see down the bottom there is where you can also find that feedback form, just in case you come across any issues when you finish or when you leave the webinar. But that's all from me now. I think we're pretty much bang on 5:30, but what we'll do is we do have a moment for questions. So I might ask the presenters to turn their video back on, and their audio. And yeah, we do have a couple of questions there. So do you want me to ask the questions and someone answer them?
You could. I was just typing a response, but do you want to?
Or which one were you answering, Alison?
I was answering the one about a Facebook collaboration page for the authors.
There you go. Would you want to answer that live?
Well, we don't currently have a collaboration platform, but we can discuss that. It's certainly a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah. So then there's another question: will the exam be shortened due to the alterations to the study design? No. And another question came through about the weighting of the exam as well. And so I think the exam is still going to be 100 marks, but it will be more heavily weighted for Unit 3 for the new, the adjusted study design. There's a question for you, Emma. Is it okay just to purchase the teacher interactive version?
Sorry, where's that? Is it okay to? Yeah, most certainly. You can purchase the interactive version only, teacher edition. It is $249.95. So, and that is per teacher as well.
There was another question there on the best way of preparing students for exams. And I'm happy to talk about that, given that's one of my jobs at school. So one of the things I'm pretty passionate about is the way that our kids have studied traditionally, and maybe this is just a my school thing, but I'm sure that it's not. In lots of the times I speak to kids, so many students focus on the memory of stuff. They make palm cards and they read them over and over again. I speak to my kids a lot about the difference between passive and active learning. And so copying down notes, writing palm cards, reading palm cards, is actually passive learning, and none of that learning will actually go into your long-term memory. So it's really important you stretch the kids, use the brain like any other muscle, and do things like getting the kids to recall from cold. So if they are going to use palm cards to study from, questions on one side, answer on the other, or using things like Quizlet or some of those kind of things to help them recall memory from cold is a really important strategy to remember. Also reintroducing content lots of times. So when you do revision sessions, try really hard not to do Unit 3 outcome 1, Unit 3 outcome 2, Unit 4 outcome 1, Unit 4 outcome 2. Well, we're not doing a lot of outcome 2 in Unit 4, but try really hard not to follow the sequence like that, dabble backwards and forwards, because the research says that spaced repetition, coming over content many times and kind of out of sequence will help best prepare them. The other thing is, in health, I think it's one of my bugbears with our math science counterparts is we dive straight into those practice exams as being best revision. If your kids have been doing the practice exam questions throughout the book like we've spoken about today and those extended response questions, actually it's actually pointless them doing full exams if they don't know the content at the end of the year. So understanding first, memory second, because you find it hard to remember anything you don't understand, and making sure we're working from recall and making sure all of that understanding and memory is right really before they do any full practice exams. So when my maths teachers send the kids off with 30 practice exams to do on the September holidays, I send my kids away with 3 or 4 single questions because I can give them that instant feedback. They can send it to me and within 5 minutes I can mark them. And we do 1 or 2 full exams under exam conditions to get timing right. But I don't actually think doing full exams is the be all and end all. Spending kids doing 2 hours of practice exams and having to wait a week for the feedback perhaps isn't effective as doing those short bursts of single questions and getting instant feedback. So they're my top tips for study for getting ready for the Year 12 exams.
Oh, I think we have one other question there, Sonia. Sonia, what are some strategies you use to help students answer well under time pressure?
I have to comment, Emily Collum was one of my students who I did teach to write under.
Oh, wow.
I'm a little bit disappointed, Emily, that you're asking me that. I think one of the best strategies that I do is say to kids that they need to do that planning and use the margin. So I get kids to use flow charts in the margin so that they can plan out those answers all the time. And I know kids that work under time pressure think, oh, I don't have time to do that planning as well. But actually, the amount of time it takes to correct an answer that is wrong or that you're not happy with the flow or the structure of is much longer than it would take to do a quick plan. So doing the flow chart in the margin is something that I'm sure Emily remembers doing in my Year 12 class. And I think it's really important. I think it was Kate went through that answer and talking about how the key features of an SDG, then unpacking that it's not just quality education for boys and girls and then linking that all of a sudden to type 2 diabetes mellitus. You've got to make the link. And so that's where the flow chart shows, well, if we've got education, we can increase our literacy, we can read food labels, we have better understanding about making good choices. That reduces obesity and the risk of diabetes mellitus. That's quite a lot of information for students to cover in an answer. And without that flow chart, kids make these crazy leaps from being able to read to not getting diabetes. And they, I say to my kids all the time, as Judge Judy says, if it doesn't make sense, it isn't true. And so if we don't have the stuff that makes it make sense, then the answer doesn't work. Don't even know if Judge Judy is still on tally, but I remember her saying that.
I think she is. Well, I think that is all the questions we have. So that probably ends the webinar, I think. Thanks to everyone who came along. I hope you got a lot out of it. And thanks again to our presenters.